Welcome in everybody to effectively the first video on the 2026 rookie draft class on this DLF YouTube channel. Today we're going to be running through an updated look at my marker system. For those of you that maybe are unaware or have joined a little bit late to this channel, the marker system is essentially my name for my modeling system, quote unquote, where I have a set of baselines that I'm looking for college players to hit that are coming into the NFL draft, based on what previously successful NFL players had coming out of college. So essentially it's a gathering of a whole bunch of statistics, whether it's simple things just like counting stats like receiving yards or touchdowns or anything like that, more advanced stuff like yards per team pass attempt, dominator rating, breakout ages, all that kind of stuff. And then just also PFF markers, which is a separate thing. We're not going to be discussing that yet because I didn't want to pull PFF numbers for this, but that is a separate add-on that I added last year that really allows me to dive into players on a more individualized basis using metrics from PFF like ADOT or yards per route run, targets per route run, broken tackle rate, like all that kind of stuff for multiple positions. But essentially what this video is going to be, especially for the fans of the marker system, this video is a look at the 2026 draft class utilizing my marker system if the season were to end today. And what I think that this video could really help to serve as is as you guys are trying to make playoff pushes, whether you're selling draft picks or buying draft picks, if you're rebuilding, coming up on any trade deadlines or essentially the NFL playoffs here at the beginning of December, this video hopefully gives you guys a little bit more of an understanding of what the 2026 class actually could be looking like, especially in that first round. I'll tell you right now, it's not all that great. As we've known that the 2026 draft class is not great. The top end is pretty nice. We have, I would say, a handful of very, very good prospects. And then after that, it gets a little suspect. And the depth of this class is not tremendous. I do not really like anybody in the second round. I'm sure I'm going to end up liking people as we go through the entire draft process. But just as a whole, the second round, third round, looks a little iffy right now. So let's just dive into it. Let's take a look at what we got going on. I built out just a separate Excel sheet just to kind of show you guys what we got here at all four positions. And then I'll kind of end with a cumulative look at what the potential top 15 to 20-ish could potentially look like for the 2026 class. So this is just a look at the quarterbacks in this class. I effectively just pulled as many of the quarterbacks that are draft eligible and again, don't yell at me that you see Arch Manning is in here as the QB2 in this class. I just pulled guys that were draft eligible. Whether or not these guys actually declare, I don't know. I don't think Arch Manning's declaring. I don't think Nico is declaring. Honestly, I would be surprised if Lenore Sellers even declares right now. So I don't know what any of these guys actually end up doing in terms of declaring or not. But I just pulled all of the names that are draft eligible to give us an outlook of what could happen in the best case scenario for the 2026 class. So basically the quarterback marker system it's pretty easy. Like it's a lot of counting statistics in terms of looking for players to have a certain level of collegiate experience in terms of actually starting games, having enough volume, having good enough production on that volume. So I'm looking for multi-year starters at the quarterback position. And I don't really like, these one-year guys, these projects, all that kind of stuff. We've seen a lot of them come into the NFL with a lot of hype and then they flame out very quickly. So I'm liking multi-year starters at the collegiate level, and especially the guys that produce really well on those multi-years of starting. And I think that's the main issue with this quarterback class is we do not have a lot of multi-year starters, and the starters that are multi-year starters did not produce very well as multi-year starters, essentially. So in my marker system for quarterbacks, there are 16 markers that we can finalize right now for the quarterback position because the only other one that is left out of the 17 total markers is draft capital. So we don't have that as of right now. But the other 16 for the quarterback position, I can do right now. And of course, we could finalize heights and weights and the BMIs and all that kind of stuff. But if the season were to end today, this is effectively what the quarterback class looks like out of 16 markers, which is not all that great when the leading quarterback in John Mateer is only hitting on half of them. Now, no quarterback has ever hit on all 100% of the 17 markers. We've gotten some that have been really close. They've been at 14, 15, all that kind of stuff. And I'll show you guys kind of an overview, a comparison of how this class compares to the last couple of classes at the end. But to have John Mateer sitting as the QB1 right now with only 8 markers hit does not feel great. And I think, again, that just highlights kind of the theme of not only the quarterback position, but also the class as a whole for 2026 is really light on production. And that might not be, that's not really going to be a strong suit for my marker system when I'm looking at how did players produce in college if they did not have a lot of good production. That just means either we need to have an asterisk on this class and maybe evaluate and lean in more on their film and what's going on with that, or it could just be indicative of, yeah, this is just not a good class. These guys did not produce. They were not worthy of the production that they had in college. They were either behind guys that were much better that came out in 2024, 2025, or they are behind other guys that might be better that are going to come out in 2027 or potentially 2028. It just might not be a good class, or we might really have to dive in with an even bigger magnifying glass on film as opposed to analytics to really find the diamonds in the rough here. Not to say that you should just throw out everything that my marker system is saying, but this year in particular might be a little bit more difficult to evaluate because of the lack of production. Or again, maybe that just means none of these guys are really worth it. So John Mateer was my sneaky QB1 whenever I did this preview, kind of at the before the season started back in the summer. Mateer was my QB1 then. He still is my QB1 now on still not a lot of volume. But he's flashed. He's looked good on a per pass attempt basis. Some people are wondering whether or not his game will actually translate to the NFL, whether it's not so much gimmicky, maybe a little bit gimmicky, but also kind of big turnover potential possibilities that he gets away with in Oklahoma and not going to get away with in the NFL. I'm kind of viewing him as this year's Jackson Dart, though. I really like John Mateer. I really like Jackson Dart last year. And so far, that has worked out pretty well. And I really like John Mateer. So if he were to be drafted in the top 10 or 15 this year, I think that would be tremendous for Dynasty. And if I can get him in the late first round of Superflex leagues, I would absolutely love that, based on where his ADP is right now and where his NFL draft profile could possibly top out at. Arch Manning, obviously, he's in here at QB2, which I think is tremendous considering that he's only played 1 year. So I think, obviously, he's not going to retire this year, it seems. So that just bodes well for how good of a prospect he looks for in 2027. Klubnik is up there. I'm kind of meh on Cade Klubnik. I think we've seen enough out of him to just know that he's just going to be fine. Maybe he's a starter. Maybe he's not a great starter. Essentially. Lenore Sellers, I know there's a lot of hype that he could have been the 101 this year in both the NFL and for Dynasty. But I just don't see it with the hype. And maybe it was the offense. They did fire their offensive coordinator a couple weeks ago, so maybe it was an offensive issue. But I think that's also indicative of perhaps Sellers goes back to college for one more year to then just prove that he can do it in a different offensive system. So I'm not thoroughly sold on the fact that Sellers even declares. If he does, he'll be an okay prospect, but he's not somebody that I'm like drooling over essentially in this class. Carson Beck, I know a lot. I think I heard Todd McShay talking about how people, draft scouts that he's talked to in the NFL, they're not out on Carson Beck. They think they can not so much fix him, but that he can work in their offense. So he's just kind of interesting. Fernando Mendoza, I think, is the most interesting name on this list, though. He's sitting here at 6 out of 8 markers. If you were to put him at the top of the list of the sixes, he would be the QB4 in this class, essentially, which is a little bit of ways away from him being the consensus QB1 in the class and almost effectively the consensus first overall pick, the quarterback that teams are tanking for. Is he going to be the next New York Jet, the next New Orleans Saint, the next Cleveland Brown? He has become the belle of the ball essentially for this quarterback class, and yet he's down here at best at QB4 pre-draft, assuming that the season were to end today. Now he can hit on, I think, 1 or 2 other markers as I was looking through this, because he's going to play perhaps like 5 more games. He's got 2 more regular season games. He'll play in the Big Ten Championship. He'll probably get a first round bye in the college football playoffs, but then he'll play 2 more after that. So he can play in 5 more games to further produce. But his production hasn't really followed behind the hype that is Fernando Mendoza. Now, I will say, speaking as a Penn State fan, I did watch what he did in the final drive of that Penn State-Indiana game. Now, he looked bad for a vast majority of that Indiana game, but for him to then have come out and led that game-winning drive against Penn State just this past weekend was absolutely incredible. I saw everything that everybody was talking about on film. And I mean, I've seen Mendoza throughout the year too, but he always seemed like a guy that like I understood the hype, but like I wasn't necessarily there. And so I'm glad that my marker system reflects that, but I do think that he is going to be a guy that, assuming that he is the first overall quarterback, and probably is maybe a top 4 or 5 NFL draft pick, I might be a little bit more hands off, but I think he's going to be pretty solid. I don't know if he necessarily has the ceiling, but I think he's going to be solid, which in this draft class, solid is kind of more difficult to come by. Drew Aller is down in there. I don't like Drew Aller as a Penn State fan. I'm not in on Drew Aller. I've said that for months now, or even almost over a year, that I just don't think Drew Aller is a top 3, top 5 NFL quarterback in this class. And he showed us that this year, and then had the season-ending injury. So now we don't even have any more production for his numbers are done essentially. And he's coming in here at 5 out of 16 markers hit, may not even be a first-round pick. Nico's probably not going to declare. Time Simpson, I think, is the other guy. I just saw a Ray Garvin video where he was saying, he was basically comparing Mendoza versus Ty Simpson as who should be the QB1 in this draft class. Who should the Jets take? And my marker system doesn't really like either one of them. Now, Simpson, I think, is just more because he hasn't had the experience. So, maybe that's one of the things where we need to rely more on film. But that's also another one of those things where I just don't really like quarterbacks who don't have the experience, man. To then be asked to develop in the NFL. The NFL is no longer in the business of developing quarterbacks. So that's a really difficult thing to ask players to translate into the NFL that do not have that collegiate experience. And then if they struggle in the NFL, they don't know how to deal with that because they didn't have the experience in the league, in college. And it's just difficult. I think that's what I think I want to impress upon people with this marker system for quarterbacks, is that the lack of experience and then the lack of production on that experience are two difficult things for quarterbacks to get over if they're not succeeding immediately in the NFL. Dante Moore's down here pretty low on this list. I think he's not going to declare. He's going to be a 2027 guy as well. And then Garrett Nussmeier just sucks. He's not it. My cousins and my aunt and uncle, they live and are from Louisiana, so they're LSU fans. And I was just talking to them this past weekend because they were up here visiting, and they do not like Nussmeier either as LSU fans. So they backed that up. We were laughing because he's just not it. So I would not be considering Garrett Nussmeier as anything close to a top 20 pick in Superflex rookie drafts this year. He might be a fun flyer, but he's just not that dude. So that's a look at essentially the 2026 quarterback class. Now, I did say I have this down here to compare this class compared to the last couple, which I think I have 20. Do I have 2022? I do have 2022 over here. My screen's not big enough. But what I did was I stripped the other quarterback classes down to compare them one for one. And for quarterbacks, all that we're missing right now is draft capital. So I just stripped the draft capital off of the marker system for all these guys. So I'm effectively trying to compare what did the 2025 class look like pre-draft, 2024 pre-draft, so that we have a more one-to-one comparison with this class versus previous classes. And you can see, at least compared to 23, 24, and 25, this class does not shape up at all. Like for the fact that John Mateer is sitting at 8 markers as the QB1, when that would have been effectively the same as Kyle McCord or Will Howard last year. It would have been around the same as J.J. McCarthy or Michael Penix in 2024. But then that would have been Stetson Bennett in 2023, behind Bryce and Stroud, even in that like Aiden O'Connell range. And then in 2022, Sam Howell was sitting at 13. Pickett was at 10. Purdy was at 10. So Matt Corral was at 8. Like, that's essentially, I've been comparing this class to 2022 as a whole, which also works as a quarterback comparison because outside of Brock Purdy, who was a 7th round pick in the NFL, none of the quarterbacks have panned out for 2022. And I think that is kind of the fear for 2026, is that none of these quarterbacks are really going to pan out. And I mean, the other fear is we have a lot of guys who might not even declare. So if this class really does come down to just, maybe Mateer declares, we have Drew Aller for sure. Ty Simpson and Mendoza are going to declare because they're getting the hype. Beck declares. Klubnik probably declares. Like, out of those 5 or 6 names, to not have like a for sure guy, even in the names that we think are for sure, in Mendoza and Ty Simpson, I mean, it's not great, Bob. That's essentially what I'm coming down to say. Like, the top quarterbacks in this class, analytically through my marker system, are coming in as like the QBs 3, 4, 5 in the past couple of classes, comparing closest to the 2022 class. So it's a little scary right now. But there's names. There's potential for sure, and there are names. I'm not saying these guys are doomed from the start. They just don't look as good as previous classes. Now, as we get to the running back position, obviously the highlight of the 2026 class, one of the names is Jeremiah Love for sure. And he's coming in here at the tippy top of my marker system. So he is justified in all capacity with the hype for him as the probable rookie 1.01 across all formats. With my running back marker systems, I'm looking for production. I have an age one in here. Best reception season, total yards in their first 2 seasons, points per game in terms of best and last. Weight, you have to hit a certain weight threshold, which I believe is 200 pounds. And then BMI, you have to hit at least 30. There are other ones. So I have like combine numbers for 40 and burst score and speed score and all that stuff. So we don't have that yet. And even the height weights aren't fully finished yet because I'll have those numbers from the combine. And then draft capital. So those are the remaining markers that are left for running backs to get them to 12 total. So as of right now, if the season were to end today, we only have the capacity to grade them on 8 actual markers. So seeing Jeremiah Love sitting at 7 out of 8 markers is absolutely tremendous. Only a handful of running backs historically since either, I think it's 2003, 2004, however, 20 something years essentially is what my marker system goes back. Only a handful of running backs have ever hit on every single marker. Genti did it last year. Bijan did it a couple years ago. So those are the names that are like tippy top. And for Jeremiah Love to, he could still be in that conversation. Like if he weighed a little bit more or his height was a little bit down so that he hit on a 30 BMI, because he's at a 29. I don't know what the number is. He's at a 29. So if he got to a 30 BMI, he would be hitting on all 8 markers right now. And then if he ran well at the combine, obviously he's probably going to be a first-round pick. He could be a perfect 12 out of 12 running back prospect. And even if he's not, if he's an 11 out of 12, if he just misses on BMI or something like that, that's still obviously tremendous to have in any class, and especially tremendous in this 2026 class when we feel so devoid of talent. Having a name like Jeremiah Love is tremendous. So he's obviously phenomenal. Jonah Coleman comes in next, the kid out of Washington. So he's hitting on 6 out of 8 markers, which is also really great, setting him up to potentially get to the double digits, which is phenomenal. The one thing that he really misses on is yards per team play, career yards per team play, which I am messing around. I might add another marker or maybe replace the career yards per team play with best and last yards per team play, kind of like I do for points per game, or at least what I do with receptions. So I'm messing around with that in my head. So that might change between now and whenever these numbers are finalized. But as of right now, that and best points per game, I'm looking for 25. He's at 24. So he's really close to getting to 7 or 8 markers. But size-wise, he's phenomenal. Production-wise, he's phenomenal. And mostly across the board. I mean, Jonah Coleman looks like a really, really strong prospect in this year's class too. After that is where things kind of get dicier. So Nick Singleton comes in RB3. As a Penn State fan, I'm not a Nick Singleton fan. I really wanted to be. I loved him as a Devy prospect, but he constantly underperformed to my expectations. Conversely, Katron Allen, Singleton's running mate, has, I think, increasingly exceeded my expectations, and more often than not, I think looked better than Nick Singleton. Singleton, I think I've comped him to like a worse Travion Henderson in that he is an absolute dynamic speedster. Get him on the edge, get him in open space. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. That is Nick Singleton. Whereas Katron is kind of like the pounder. So, if you want to compare it to the Lions backfield, Katron is Monty. Katron is Mark Ingram to Alvin Kamara. He is Ramondre to Travion. That is Katron Allen. And he's not scoring all that far behind Nick Singleton in my marker system. 4 for Singleton, 3 for Katron. So I would keep an eye on Katron Allen as to where he goes. He might have like a Brian Robinson type of career, which B-Rob had, I would say he had good enough, relevant enough fantasy success for the first couple of years before then being traded, and is now just a handcuff. But if that is the upside for Katron, that's not terrible as like a late day 3 pick. I really, really like Justice Haynes a lot. He hits on 3 of my markers. The ones that he doesn't are the yards per team play, which isn't necessarily his fault. He was playing behind other kids at Alabama, and then he transferred to Michigan this year and has looked absolutely phenomenal at Michigan. So he might be a guy that if I switch to best or last yards per team play, he would definitely benefit from. And then again, he didn't have the early production that I'm looking for because he was behind other guys at Alabama, and then he does not have the receiving upside that, Love or Coleman or Singleton or anybody else has. He's much more of a 2-down back that I think has capability to catch out of the backfield, but hasn't displayed that at the collegiate level yet. But I really, really like Justice Haynes. I think if I were grading right now, he would be my RB3 in the class. I like Darius Taylor a lot. CJ Baxter, I'm not sure if he declares. Actually, I'm almost positive that he doesn't, because of the injury in 2024, and has not played a ton this year as well. So he could help strengthen the 2027 class even more. So he's down in here. If he declares, I would be surprised. But he's down in there right now just because he doesn't really have the production to follow up because of the injuries. It's really just the injuries that's killed him. Desmond Reed is kind of interesting as a more scat back kind of guy. He has a ton of receptions, so he's going to be interesting just to follow along. Same goes for I already mentioned Darius Taylor, is kind of a little bit smaller. Jadarian Price is kind of interesting out of Notre Dame as well. So there are some names for sure, but obviously highlighted by Jeremiah Love. Jonah Coleman's not far behind. I really like Justice Haynes. And then we have some interesting names behind that. So to give you guys, again, the comparison between 2026 and the other past few classes, Love obviously comps pretty well with Genty and Bijan, and I think Brees was up there. Brees was at 8 before the NFL draft as well, or before the combine, I should say. So I stripped off combine numbers and everything, so it's just production for all these running backs comparing the 2026 class to the past classes. So if Love is like just below a Genty or Bijan level, kind of like he is like an Amari and Hampton level running back, that is, I think, phenomenal. Jonah Coleman is not far behind if he's, somewhere in there as like a Kenneth Walker / Scadaboo was great, but then fell to day 3. Jahmyr Gibbs was sitting at 5 at this point before the combine really exploded. Then he had top 12 overall draft capital. So Jonah Coleman being there at 6 is pretty good as well. But I think what you'll notice, and this will fill out more because we'll have more names coming in here that will declare. I'm just kind of grabbing the top guys for a more top level view of the class. I feel like we don't have a ton of depth in here yet. Like, you see a lot of guys are in the 4s and 5s category at this point, especially in 2023, that made that class so strong. Even last year, we had multiple guys at the 7s and 6s and stuff like that. 2022, we had multiple guys at 6 and 5 and 4. Like Kyron was at 4 at this point. Algier was at 6. Rashad White was at 6. B-Rob was at 3. We don't have that yet. And maybe that's just me because I'm not sampling enough of running backs for this class. But we don't really have those guys like to fill out a lot of 6s, a lot of 5s, a lot of 4s. We're just kind of down here at the 2 and 3 range as of right now. And again, that could be a sampling issue with me not pulling the whole entire class. But that might be, again, theme of the 2026 class. Don't have a lot of production for the prospects that we have. And then we don't have a lot of depth for the prospects that we have. So it could be more of the same for the running back class. Now, wide receivers. So again, we're looking for production. We're looking for breakout year. We're looking for sub 2 for 20% threshold, a sub 3 breakout year for 30% threshold. I've got yards per team pass attempt, market share of yards, fantasy points per game. And then I do have height and weight in there, but again, that could be finalized at the combine. So the only markers that we're missing are the 3 combine numbers for 40 and burst score and speed score, and then draft capital. So we are at this time with just production only. We are at 10 out of markers. So the top guys can only be at 10, and the top guys we have here have 7. So obviously the wide receiver 1 in this class all season has been Jordan Tyson. And he looks really great. So if he has the potential to get to 11 or 12 markers hit, that would be tremendous for Jordan Tyson for the wide receiver 1 in this class. Mekhi Lemon is right there as well with 7 markers hit. Danny Scudero leading the NCAA in receiving yards, I think right now. He's averaging 125 receiving yards per game. And he's a I don't know if he's a JUCO kid or a D2 kid or whatever, but he came up to San Jose State this year. So he only has 1 year on his production, but man, that 1 year has been absolutely incredible for Scudero. So we'll see what happens with him. He might be more interesting as like a day 2 kind of guy in the NFL draft, and we'll see where he eventually ends up. Maybe he's a guy that ends up I kind of fall in love with a little bit more, and then he kind of makes me sad. Or maybe he's like a Josh Downs kind of dude. You know, that could be possible. But at least with the top 2 guys, in terms of my marker system being Tyson and Lemon, that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to skip over a couple of names because then I'll talk about Carnell Tate here, who is sitting at, if we put him at the top of the 3s. So wide receiver 6. So he's behind Deuce Robinson and Nick Harbor, both of whom he's not actually going to be behind them in my actual rankings. That's just where the production's coming from. I talked about this in my Friday AMA. So somebody mentioned about what's going on with the class, and I mentioned that Carnell Tate, I already know, was not going to have a ton of markers hit because he just doesn't have the production at Ohio State. And that, again, it seems like it's an Ohio State issue for the fact that he's in his 3rd year right now, but he had played behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Ibuka, and the quarterback system was a little iffy. Like, obviously he wasn't going to have the production. Like, Ibuka at this time last year did not have a lot of production either because he was playing behind Marv and JSN, and he even was in the same depth chart as Wilson and Olave, I believe. So it's just a wide receiver issue. But obviously, I've watched Carnell Tate multiple years. I watched what he did to Penn State this year. He's absolutely incredible. He's going to be a guy that I just don't really care about what the marker system says. Maybe that means that he might have a little bit more. I don't know. I was going to say maybe he might have a slight issue translating, depending on what team he goes to in the situation. But I mean, even then, like, Carnell Tate is incredible. I don't want to scare anybody by him being the wide receiver 6 in the class right now on production. And I also don't want anybody to come at me in the comments and being like, my marker system's broken. I know it's not broken. I knew that Carnell Tate was not going to have good numbers because he just did not have the production. But I understand the context of why he doesn't have the production. And I've watched him play, and he's really, really freaking good. So I think it would be a debate between if I would have him or Lemon as my wide receiver 2. I would probably lean towards Lemon with Tate as my 2, but they're both probably in the same. They're right there. It's 2A, 2B for me with Lemon and Tate, with Tyson as my wide receiver 1. I don't like Nick Harbor at all. I don't think he really knows how to play football. I think he's just a big dude in college. And that's not going to translate to the NFL. Denzel Boston, I think, is another interesting name. I do not have an age for him. This is one of the biggest struggles. It's just a small rant. One of my biggest struggles is I don't know why we never have date of births for all of these guys. Like, why is this information just not readily available? Like, I could Google some of these players, most of these players, and I'll get a date of birth. But for some of these other players, I can't find Denzel Boston's date of birth, so I don't know how old he is. I can guess that he's 2021. I can take that guess. He's probably more like 22 because he's a 4-year player. But I don't know. I just, so it's annoying. That's why I don't have ages for some of these guys. And age is a marker. I will have ages by the time that all this is finalized, because as we dive into this whole entire class, that information will pop out. But I just don't have it right now because for some reason I can't just Google Denzel Boston's birthday and it just doesn't pop up like it does for everybody else. But he's another name that I think is very interesting. Eric Singleton, I think, is very interesting. Jacoby Lane, the other USC kid. Kevin Concepcion out of Texas A&M. Antonio Williams out of Clemson. Barian Brown. Chris Brazel, I know, is getting some draft hype. Elijah Surratt, draft hype. Jeremy Bernard, draft hype, Alabama kid. Zachariah Branch is, I think we're done with Zachariah Branch. Hopefully we're done with Zachariah Branch. So the wide receiver class, it's not great, but there are names for sure. So that's why, like, I kind of, again, I've been calling this 2026 class to 2022. And 2022, if you remember, that's the class that gave us Chris Olave, it gave us Garrett Wilson, it gave us Jamison Williams, a few other names at the wide receiver class that ended up being pretty solid for fantasy football and for Dynasty. So I think that's why, when I say that this class is closest comparison to 2022, that is, I think, an indictment on the quarterbacks. We have some solid running backs, obviously a top name in Jeremiah Love, like we had a top name in Breece Hall in that class, with some interesting names like we had with Rashad White and Kenneth Walker, and then Kyron Williams ended up popping. So there we have it for the running back class. Wide receiver class, like it was for them with Olave, Wilson, JMO, it's Tyson, Lemon, Tate, Denzel Boston, all these other kind of names, Jacoby Lane. So there are interesting names. I definitely think that there's enough in this class to kind of flesh out a first round. And we'll get to that in a moment, but that's essentially what I'm viewing for the wide receiver class. And again, to compare them with the past few classes, last year, T-Mac and Luther Burden were sitting at an 8 out of 10 markers. At this time, Neighbors was at a full 10 out of 10. So that just shows how incredible of a prospect he was. Marv was at an 8. Odunze was at a 7. BTJ was at a 7. 2023, again, this is JSN did not have the production at Ohio State because he basically did not play his final year, and then he was behind Olave and Garrett Wilson. So again, this is an Ohio State thing with Carnell Tate. JSN was my wide receiver 1 in that class and has easily shown, outside of Puka, that he was essentially the wide receiver 1 from that class. Over here, like Olave and Garrett Wilson, they were at a 6. Traylon was at a 9. Rest in peace. Wandale was at a 9, so he's not bad. Khalil Shakir was at an 8. Drake London was at a 6. So again, like there were names for sure, like there were in 2022. And I think where Abuka's at a 3, like I mentioned. So Carnell Tate's at a 3, Abuka's at a 3. So it's like the wide receiver class, I would say, while not to say that the wide receiver class is the strong suit of the 2026 class, shows you how bad the 2026 class is overall. But it also, I think, again, shows you that there are most certainly names in this class that we should be wanting to draft. It is not a bad class. It's just not a deep class. And it is, but every class always has names and guys that you would be happy to have drafted. And I think 2026 with Tyson, Lemon, Tate, some interesting names that we'll kind of get through, especially after the combine and everything like that. When we fully dive into this class in the spring, there will most certainly be names. And then I'm sure there will be names that I fall in love with in the second round and third rounds and all that stuff. There are every year. And we'll just have to see how they translate. Now, final position here with the tight end position. I only pulled 4 names just because these were at the top of essentially the DLF Devi rankings. I think what is most interesting is that the consensus tight end 1 in this class, Kenyon Sadiq, has hit on 0 markers. He doesn't have a single marker hit, which doesn't bode well. I mean, he was playing behind / with Terrence Ferguson at Oregon, so there is that. But for him to not have hit on anything, and I'm sure he's going to hit on the athleticism once. He's insanely athletic. So he's not going to have a 0 at the end of all of this. And he's probably going to be drafted on day 2. So he's not going to be at the bottom of the tight end list. But of the 4 that I pulled, and for him to have 0 production is a little alarming to me. However, we do know that one of the best ways to find a fantasy relevant tight end is to trust in the athleticism. And Kenyon Sadiq has that in spades. So as long as he goes to a situation to where he could produce or has the upside to produce, he could be pretty solid. But I'm not going to overly draft Kenyon. Like, I don't think he's a first round pick. He might be an early second. He's probably just going to be a guy that's like, if he's there at a reasonable spot, maybe at like 203 or something like that, 204, I'll maybe try to take the shot on it. Honestly, I'm more intrigued by Michael Trigg. I think I've already been intrigued by Michael Trigg for a couple years now. He did not declare last year that I thought he was going to, but then he did not. I'm intrigued by him. And then Eli Stowers has had really strong production for like 2 years now at Vandy. That I'm very interested in Stowers. I haven't heard like any draft hype about him. I think I have seen he is Mel Kiper's F back one or something like that. Like Kiper, I was looking at his rankings the other day when I was preparing for this video, and he does not have Stowers with the tight ends. He doesn't have Trigg, I think, with the tight ends either. So he has Sadiq and Claire as the tight end 1 and 2, and then he's got Stowers and Trigg as like his like F back 1 and 2. So he separated it out to where they're 2 different tight end groups, which I guess makes sense because maybe they play different kind of positions, quote unquote, in college. And maybe that's why Sadiq and Claire don't have as much production, but Stowers and Trigg do. Or maybe it's Sadiq and Trigg and then Stowers and Claire. I don't know. But he had Stowers as the tight end, has his F back 1, and Sadiq was his tight end 1. So there's at least interest there from Kiper. But I haven't really seen it like in draft circles or anything like that yet, with Eli Stowers being there. Now I'm sure he probably will get hype throughout the draft season. I'm not saying that he's like the Oronde Gadsden diamond in the rough of the 2026 class right now. I mean, he could be, but I don't think he's gonna be that. I think he'll be pretty highly regarded in this tight end class. And honestly, I think he's the guy that I'm most interested in as of right now, hitting on 8 out of 10 markers. I've got to dive deeper into all these guys, and of course, there's going to be more tight ends to add to this whole entire draft class. But as we stand right now, Stowers, I think, is the most interesting name for me in this class, and he seems to be the one that is least talked about, especially whenever you compare him to Sadiq out of Oregon. But again, to compare what's going on, again, I only pulled 4 names, so it's not like we don't have a ton of depth. There will be a lot more names to add, but I only pulled the top guys. Gadsden, as you see, is right. He was right there with Loveland, Fannin, and Warren at this time last year. He was hitting on 9. Loveland, Fannin were hitting on 8. Warren was at 7. Bowers was at 8 this time 2 years ago. Sinnott was at 7 that class. Kincaid and Mayer were at 8 each. Kraft was at 7. And then Likely was at 9. McBride and Dulcich were at 8 in 2022. So I would say, at least in terms of potential strength, if Stowers ends up being like a thing, he has some pretty strong comparables in terms of production from my marker system at this point when you remove the athleticism stuff from their profiles and draft capital. So Stowers, I think, is in good company as of right now. Trigg could also be really interesting, as I mentioned. Sadiq will then have athleticism coming up behind him and draft capital as well. Claire might have some athleticism behind him. We'll see. But overall, the tight end class, like it's we shouldn't just ignore it. There are going to be names, but I don't think there's going to be anybody that I would be willing to take in the first round. Maybe Stowers I could see sneaking into the first, but I think he's going to end up being more of like a Harold Fannin, Michael Mayer, Isaiah Likely kind of guy, Tucker Kraft, Sam Laporta, as opposed to, having obviously not the Bowers hype, but even Kincaid was a first round pick. Loveland and Warren were first round picks. McBride was a first round pick. I don't think he's going to have that type of hype. I think he's going to be a little bit more slept on, and that might be a place where I'm more willing to go get him as a second rounder. Now we'll finish out this video with a look at how I think first rounds are potentially going to look. Now, again, this is me talking about this at the beginning of November. We haven't even finished the college football regular season yet. We'll still have conference championships, bowl games, college football playoffs players to even declare if they're eligible to declare, but then they stay. We still have all of that. But this is, I think, how things will look come draft season in May after the NFL draft for rookie drafts. Love and Tyson, I think, are going to be the for sure 101, 102. Then you've got Lemon in there. Mendoza will probably get his name up there just because he's going to be a top 3 pick. Carnell Tate will be up there. Jonah Coleman, Justice Haynes. And then I didn't really order Simpson, Mateer, Sellers. I just have them as like they're the interesting other quarterbacks to kind of round out a top 10. But I think just the fact that we have these names right here, including Justice Haynes, to get me down to 107, I think shows you that this class has strength at the top. So if you have a first round pick that is mid to early, I would hold on to it. I would not be trading it. I would hold on to it and draft a really, really good prospect come May 2026. Now, if you have a later first, that's where things start to get a little bit dicier. That's where you have to start leaning into, a Ty Simpson, a John Mateer. Nick Singleton might still, this is where the honorable mentions kind of come in. Nick Singleton could be in that range. Sadiq could be in that range. Maybe we like a Klubnik or Jaden Mayava out of USC. Maybe Carson Beck is in there. He gets a draft capital. Maybe it's Denzel Boston or Chris Bell or Jacoby Lane. Those guys have also gotten kind of top 50 to top 70-ish NFL draft hype at this moment as like second round picks in the NFL. So that's where we start kind of figuring out where all this is going to go in the more later first, early second, mid second. So that's where these picks kind of get a little bit dicier. But it's not to say that I think you should just immediately sell them. It's got to make sense for you as well as a contender. But if you're a rebuilder, I would be leaning into the uncertainty. And especially if you're able to trade away players that, obviously don't help you as a rebuilder. They help a contender, guys like Devontae Adams or Cortland Sutton or running backs kind of in that range that are like older guys, like getting off of a Derrick Henry right now, getting off of a Christian McCaffrey right now. If you're rebuilding or you're not competing this year, but you still had those guys on your team, leaning into this draft class, especially as dynasty managers seem like they're more willing to hold on to their 2027 picks, and they might be more willing to part with their 26 picks because of the lack of uncertainty in this class. Lack of certainty the uncertainty in this class. I would lean into it. I would lean into, this class having names that we like to draft at the end of the first round. Maybe these players, some of these guys in the honorable mentions come up. Maybe I'm not even highlighting somebody that could be on the come up as a late first round pick, or there's Stowers gets in there from the tight end position. Other running backs can get put in there as well. I would lean into the uncertainty of 2026, especially if you're unable to get into the 2027 class because teams are clutching onto those picks like they're absolute gold, thinking every single pick is going to turn into Jeremiah Smith, and it's not. But as a rebuilder / reloader that's not competing for this year, buy up 2026 picks, especially if they are shying to be more early to mid. As a contender, I am willing to move off of your late first round pick, but it has to make sense in terms of the player that you get back. I need to have multiple years of production, top production, like what they're giving you right now. Like, I don't want to sell a first round pick for Devontae Adams. I don't want to sell a first round pick for somebody like that. I wouldn't sell a first round pick really for like Derrick Henry. It's kind of I wouldn't really sell a first round pick maybe for like a Kyron Williams. That kind of gets a little bit difficult in there too. But it's got to make sense. There's not a lot of running backs that I would pay a first round pick for. There are wide receivers. I'm thinking of guys like Jalen Waddle. I would love to. George Pickens. Add something to George Pickens. Add something to your first to get to George Pickens. Add something to your first to get to Jalen Waddle. How can you trade your first round pick for, maybe it's Chris Olave plus. Maybe it is a shot on RJ Harvey. Maybe it's a quarterback like Daniel Jones or Sam Darnold. I'm okay with that as well. Other tight ends, you to pay a first round pick plus for Tyler Warren, or it's just a straight first round pick for Sam Laporta. That's not terrible, but I don't love it. But I would still be willing just to hold on to your first round pick and not feel like you have to use that to compete, especially when this class looks, I think, stronger than what a lot of people seem to believe. Even though it's not great, I think the perception of this class is that it's really bad, and that's not necessarily the case. It's not great. There's not a lot of depth, but there will most certainly be names when we get to NFL draft season and rookie draft season that the fact that I can sit here and almost comfortably say this is your top 7 feels really good. And then if we can fill out the rest of the first round, there will be names for sure that you might not want to miss out on by trading away your first round pick in order to compete. Trade away your seconds. Totally fine with that. Trade away your seconds, multiple seconds, trade away your thirds, everything like that. But I would still be willing, just because it is a first round pick, I would still be willing to hold on to that a little bit harder than, not harder than normal, but I wouldn't be willy-nilly with it, essentially, for lack of a better word. I wouldn't just trade it just because you heard the 26 class sucks and you just need some production. I would still hold on to that first round pick like you're getting a good prospect, because there is a decent chance that at least you're getting a good prospect. Maybe not a great prospect, but a good prospect, depending on where that first round pick lands. So that's where I'm going to call it for this overview. Sorry for the longer video, but there will be a lot more videos like this coming once the NFL season ends, even as we get into December around Christmas. There's not a lot of stuff to talk about for NFL, so we'll be getting into a lot of rookie stuff as we get into, I'll say, mid to late December, and then especially through January, through February, post-combine, all of this kind of stuff. We're going to be dissecting the crap out of this 2026 class. So if you enjoy that type of content or want to see more from my marker system for this class, I highly recommend hitting that follow button for this channel. Hit that like button as well, and stick around, because I have a good feeling about what's going on with this class, and we can definitely help you guys turn your teams around or stay as competitive as possible by drafting really good rookies in this class. So appreciate you guys for watching this video, and we will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.